Hi, it's been a minute. Today I want to take you through my entire process of creating this illustration from start to finish. I've always found it a little bit difficult to break my process down, but I'm excited to finally share my approach that I've developed from painting on my iPad over the last couple of years. I hope you can take away something from this. I always start my pieces with a rough idea and a sketch. For the base sketch, I block out some basic shapes. I rarely ever use line art unless I'm starting the sketch with a character. I find with using Greyscale, I can establish very early on the background, midground, and foreground, as well as character placement and lighting all at once. I like to use this time as space for me to play around with an idea that I have in my head, play around with different compositions, and figure out the story I want to tell with my painting. I'm a big fan of using the lasso tool for this stage and pretty much the entire painting process. I find it's a quick and efficient way to put down clean graphic shapes in a composition that I want. I usually save the character for last though, to give myself flexibility to fully work on the environment first. I'm really not worried about details at all during this time. I'm just focused on making sure my idea works and if I actually vibe with it. That's why if you notice, I tend to work with my canvas really zoomed out. And once I'm happy with the main shapes in the painting, I move on to giving them minimal detail and some form. Again, I'm still using the lasso tool to select random shapes, and then what I do after is erase some of the shapes that I've painted with a textured brush. This one's my favorite. It's from a brush pack that I downloaded a couple years ago. It's by Grady Frederick. He's one of my favorite concept artists. You should definitely go check him out on ArtStation. My painting process is organic and intuitive, and I often find myself erasing and reworking elements until I discover something that resonates with me. And this approach might seem counterintuitive, but it's also how I uncover little imperfections that add character to my work. Just like in nature, nothing is perfectly sculpted, and I love leaving these happy accidents in my art. I don't know, I try not to be too precious with these things. Try and release a bit of control, try and have a little fun, and let the painting take its own shape and form. I believe as artists, we are just vessels. And instead of seeing ourselves as the sole creators, we recognize that we're channeling inspiration, ideas, and emotions from within us or the world around us to create art and to share with others. And this is what I mean by that. When I'm in a flow, something else completely takes over. It almost guides the entire creative process in unexpected and beautiful ways. So I decided to embrace spontaneity and change the midground altogether. I just love the feeling of continuity from the rainbow leading all the way down to a stream of waterfall. It just felt right to me to scrap the initial composition and go with this one. I'm still trying to refine the Greyscale sketch here. I rarely spend a lot of time rendering out too many details in grayscale. Elements in the background usually don't get as much attention as they're not in the focal point and they are much further away. So I leave them alone for a bit. The human eye only catches details within a close distance to us and with the highest contrast, so like the foreground and focal point. I'm still working on a fairly zoomed out canvas to make sure my image is getting a good read of the entire composition at one glance. And what I mean by that is, if at this point I were to show a random stranger my canvas, my painting, and if you can tell at a glance what the painting is about at this stage, then I'd say I've done my job pretty well. The Greyscale sketch, or at this point, I'm going to call it a painting, is done, and it's time for my favorite stage, which is the coloring process. Because I've done most of the hard work in the beginning, determining the values and making sure the painting has a good overall read, I've taken most of the guesswork out of this stage and I can really just have fun and enjoy myself. A little pro tip, just make sure to keep all of your elements in separate layers to keep them organized. There are many ways to color a grayscale painting, but this is how I like to do it. So what I do first is I create a new layer using the color blending mode, and then I clip it to each individual layer. So you can see I started with the background first, or the furthest element in the image, which is the sky. At this stage, I'm just painting using flat colors. And then once that's done, I merge the color blend mode layer with the grayscale layer to unify them into one layer. This is when I finalize the color. This step integrates the colors with the underlying values. Before we go any further, here's a guide on some basic color theory and how I ended up choosing the color palette for my painting. The valley and the mountains feature lots of greens and blues, which are what's called analogous colors, meaning they sit next to each other on the color wheel and together they create a harmonious effect. Blues and greens are really calming to the eyes and they create a sense of tranquility and peace, which is definitely what I was going for. For the focal point and some contrast, I've incorporated a vibrant yellow rainbow, yellow being complementary to blue but also a warm addition to the painting that makes the rainbow stand out. We have now officially entered the ugly stage. It doesn't yet reflect the vision that I had in my head, but it's important to just trust the process at this stage. I started adding more details starting from the back of the painting, working my way to the front slowly. Once again, using the lasso tool to create random shapes until I find something I like. I'm also trying to bring in some hue variation into the elements that I'm painting, because nothing in nature is just one flat color. In reality, light bounces off of surfaces and creates a range of subtle color and hue shifts. This helps create depth and brings a touch of realism to the painting. Also keeping in mind the values and saturations of things. Elements in the background aren't usually as saturated as the midground or foreground, and this creates atmospheric depth in a scene like this. I'm adding further variation with some warm and vibrant greens and yellows to the midground, seeing as the scene is set during the day along with more details. I always go back and forth checking my values, just making sure they haven't completely shifted from the sketch, and constantly adjusting them using the curve adjustment tool. Pro tip, for this, I've always kept one extra layer set to the color blend mode and the color black. I turn it on to consistently check my values as I'm painting. Please do me a favor and never zoom into my artwork, because when you look at my brushstrokes from up close, they make absolutely no sense, but when you zoom out, they seem to give the impression of enough detail. Just like the trees I used the lasso tool to create in the midground. It makes no sense to draw every single tree when that is not the focus of the image. So remember, things aren't as detailed when they're further away. Our eyes only perceive the detail that is in close proximity to us. This also creates contrast in the painting, because if there was detail everywhere, it would be too cluttered and you wouldn't know what to focus on. If everything is important, then nothing is important. So it helps to prioritize. The last stage is adding lighting. The primary light source here is the magical rainbow, so it would make sense that it illuminates the elements around it. I usually use the overlay blend mode first to block out where in the painting the light is going to hit. Then I use the add or color dodge blend mode to really brighten the lighting and give the rainbow an ethereal glow sort of an effect. I leave cleaning up my character sketch for last because that gives me room to make changes to the paintings as many times as I want, setting it to a multiply layer so that it'll be visible when I add color later on. This is a character I created last year for a concept art project, but lately she's been making a lot of appearances in my personal work. She's my little adventurer, a seeker of meaning and exploration. She journeys through vast and diverse landscapes in search of herself and whatever wonders lie beyond. Her presence in my art represents a quest for self-discovery and a deep connection with the world around her. I love how simple her design is, with a vibrant orange dress. Orange because it represents monkhood to me, reflecting my admiration for the spiritual path, I guess, and orange is also my favorite color. I like to leave the sketch in the final painting, and once I block out the colors, I add a multiple layer over my character so she doesn't stick out too much and integrates nicely into the environment. And then I complete it by adding some lighting to my character to help us stand out from the rest of the scene. I like to use hard light or color dodge for this one, and once again using bloom just to give her the beautiful, soft, ethereal kind of a glow. Lastly, and this is totally optional, but towards the end, I save my painting as a JPEG and open it in a new Procreate file. I do this so I can make some final color adjustments using the color balance feature in Procreate. This helps balances out warms and the cool tones in the painting so the painting feels cohesive and balanced. You don't have to do this, but I just like to play around with it to see what other variations of the final painting I can come up with. And that's how I use Procreate to create my artwork. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you took something valuable away from my process. And I hope you enjoyed the painting.